everybody, to the official podcast of the Chicago Fringe Festival. My name is Vinnie Lacey, Executive Director of the Chicago Fringe. We hope to bring you these podcasts in the months leading up to the annual Chicago Fringe Festival. And maybe right now you're asking, hey, what in the Sam hell's the Chicago Fringe Festival? To which I say, how did you even find this podcast then? Well, the Chicago Fringe Festival is Chicago's premier, unjuried, uncensored performing arts festival. We produce 50 shows over 2 weekends in the heart of Jefferson Park in about 5 venues, and if that sounds a little nutty, it absolutely is. We're working diligently behind the scenes to bring you the 5th year of Chicago Fringe, but for now, if you want to learn more about what we do and when that festival happens, you can check out chicagofringe.org. Now, in the spirit of uncensored and unjuried performance, we're bringing you today's guest. Oh, it's a doozy. Just like our last performers on the podcast, she has been part of the Chicago Fringe Festival since its very inception, performing every year. She's an artist, an educator, an activist. Please welcome Rebecca Kling.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Rebecca.
Vinny.
I am so intimidated by this.
Why are you intimidated?
Because I feel like...
I don't like to think of myself as an intimidating person.
Okay, that's fine. That's fair. I don't think many people... Well, maybe some people want to think of themselves as intimidating. I think... because I think you answer a lot of questions.
Yes.
In your life, you answer a lot of questions. And I've seen you perform now for 4 years at Fringe, and we're coming up on the 5th year. And I was like, what? And you always sort of leave time in your shows to ask questions, and I was trying to come up with good questions, so that was intimidating. I was like, man, I don't want to blow this with bad questions.
I don't think there are bad questions. I think there are mean questions. This is sort of the difference between, oh my God, where did you get your haircut? And oh my God, where did you get your haircut? But I don't think there's such thing as bad questions.
I feel like I've seen you answer so many questions. I just wanted to be original. That's all
I appreciate that.
I wanted to ask good questions.
You could never be unoriginal.
And I wanted to ask if I could see your vagina.
I don't know how well that would work on a podcast. I can
well,
say...
I know, but we can, like, Howard Stern it. Like, we can just... You can show Eric your back end. He's the intern. He's looking through the glass. And then I can see the front part.
Have you ever seen a naked woman before?
Yeah. Same thing?
Yeah.
No difference? I think this is the time we should bring up that you are a transgender artist.
That might be helpful.
An activist, an educator.
Yes.
People might not know that part.
In particular, in December, I had what is referred to as gender reassignment surgery. So I had what used to be a penis was transformed through the magic of modern medicine into a vagina. But we're both naked in the studio, so you should be able to see it fine right now.
I just need you to scoot those legs up a little bit more. It's getting sexy in here.
This has gone to a weird place.
It'll be so awesome. The intern's even like, he's rubbing himself or whatever, fanning himself. That's what he's saying. He's fanning himself. He's turning the fanning into a little bit of rubbing. Sexiest podcast ever. You get to talk about sex all the time.
I do.
So it just naturally comes up. People are curious about your body. They want to know.
Well, and I think
things.
That there's a big overlap between our bodies and our sexuality. They're not the same thing. We have our bodies and we use our bodies in ways that aren't sexual when we exercise or when we eat or when we sleep. And certainly there can be overlaps with those things in being sexual. And we can be sexual in ways that use our bodies, but we can also be sexual in ways that use our mind or use our voices or use our vision. And so in a lot of people's minds, sex and bodies are inextricably linked. And so questions about one often lead into questions about the other.
And do you feel like that happens specifically because of your situation, because of who you are? Like, do people want to default to sex first? Here I am asking to see the vagina.
I think it depends on the situation and it depends on... But why is that sexual? Why is me showing you my vagina sexual?
Yeah, I guess not. I guess I meant it in terms of like mechanics.
Yeah.
Like people have questions about mechanics right away.
And I think
right?
that goes back to the idea that sex and nudity overlap. So when we are being sexual, lots of times we're naked or in partial states of undress. But that's not the only time we're naked, and that's not the only way we're sexual.
I'm glad we're jumping right into this because I feel like I'm not being fair even to my own self, because I have actually seen you perform for 4 years now. I feel like we've sort of gone on this journey through Fringe.
Absolutely.
Every show that you've performed at Fringe has been different.
Well, and one of the things I love about the Chicago Fringe Festival and about having had
Tell me.
having had this relationship with the festival is that it's allowed me to grow as an artist and to share that with a community and to get feedback from that community of audiences coming back year after year or working with the volunteers and the staff year after year to build this relationship with an artistic home in a way that feels very safe to be able to share where I am and what's going on in my life every year.
Yeah, have you always been a performer?
I have always been involved in the arts. I grew up taking theater classes up in Evanston, which is where I grew up, and enjoyed performing. I didn't think for a long time that it was something I was going to be doing professionally or in my real life because, first of all, auditioning is miserable. I hate auditioning.
Who doesn't?
Right. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to use the tools of performance to tell my own story or stories of people like me that it sort of clicked that what had been missing from a lot of my experience of performing was that catharsis of sharing part of myself.
Right. So the stories had to come from you.
At least for where I am right now. You know, I would never want to say this will be how it is forever. But for where I am right now, that's a big part of what excites me about being an artist.
And when did that come into focus for you?
In 2008, I had the opportunity to work with Tim Miller, who's a phenomenal gay performance artist based out of LA. And that was the first chance that I had to use some of these tools that in retrospect, I realized I'd been gathering my whole life through doing theater up in Evanston, through doing performance studies at Northwestern, through blogging and writing and sharing parts of myself online. That sort of clicked of, oh, this is really personally powerful, and I'm getting feedback both from members of the trans community and people outside the trans community of value of sharing that story.
And then for people who haven't seen your work at a Fringe Festival or elsewhere, because we'll also say now that you tour lots of universities, and I'm sure there are other avenues, festivals, etc., that you've performed at. Like, what's the pitch, right? Like, what's Rebecca in a nutshell, or a couple of sentences?
I am a performer who works primarily through storytelling, but also through humor and video projection and movement and audience interaction to talk about gender and sexuality, and in particular, trans identity. And so I'm considering myself a performer with educational components and an educator with performance components. So when I go to a university and do Trans 101 or do Being an Ally to the Trans Community, that has a lot of anecdotes and a lot of humor and a lot of discussion, and I don't want it to be dry academic. Similarly, when I'm doing performance material, I want to be sharing things that are going to, at the very least, prompt thought and questioning in an audience, and hopefully allow people who aren't familiar with this to come away with new information, and people who are more familiar or even part of this community to come away with a feeling like they have seen themselves on stage. Okay.
And is that hard? Deciding what you like more, I guess, or balancing like what... I mean, I know how this works in my artistic life, like what pays versus what is fun to do or artistically interesting and compelling to do.
I feel somewhat spoiled, lucky, privileged, whatever the word you want to use, in that I, again, have this background that makes me attractive to colleges and universities who have budgets. I have a lot of privilege in terms of education and in terms of race and in terms of class, and that this is a topic, trans identity, whose time has come in the media. And so I think 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to get funding to do the work that I'm doing in the same way I can today. And hopefully, I'm not so naive to say it won't be necessary in 20 years, but hopefully in 20 years, there will be more people out there who grew up with trans identity as, if not normal, at least a possibility that wasn't disgusting or fetishized or sexualized or objectified. And so there will be less of a pressing need for people to be out there doing this work.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I'm always curious about how did that financial piece happen for you too, right? Like I'm always trying to balance trying to bring enough artistic work in so that I don't have to find other jobs, other, ways to make an income, ways to make a living. Was there a conscious decision now I'm going to be a full-time artist educator? Did you feel like there was a switch at one point?
Evolved.
And I know that to everybody who's listening, this might sound like a dry question, but it is what artists deal with all the time,
definitely.
Figuring that out.
I was in arts administration for 3 years after graduating from college. I was the general manager at an arts organization in Evanston and started performing started performing on the side, finding gigs here or there, performing when friends would say, oh, we're doing this workshop or we're doing this variety show, and realized that was where my passion lied. I'm good at arts administration. I enjoyed it. And in another life, maybe that was something I could have made a career out of. It wasn't what drove me. And so in 2010, the first year of the Chicago Fringe Festival, I decided to leave my full-time job and try to do this crazy arts thing as a full-time career. And initially, I didn't really know what that meant. I leapt without looking to some extent in a way that, again, I would say is as much luck as I've worked my ass off, certainly, but I also would say that some of it was luck in terms of what I have to offer and the time in our culture that we're at. And so at first I tried to do primarily performance and touring in that way, and that is artistically satisfying, tons of fun, and not hugely lucrative. I have very, very, very good things to say about the Fringe Festival circuit in general and the Chicago Fringe specifically. Very few artists can afford to do that full time.
Oof, tell me about it.
And it has nothing to do with whether or not the work I have is good. It has to do with whether or not the work any other artist has is good. It has to do with whether or not you can fill a theater at a Fringe Festival in Chicago and Indianapolis and Kansas City and Minneapolis and New York and Miami. And that's really hard. And that's the minority of artists who have that type of demographic draw. And so as
the minority of artists that have that kind of draw?
Who are able to pull.
Oh, that are able to pull.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. That are able to.
Who are able to make a living doing primarily Fringe Festival or theater touring.
Got it.
And as I was doing more artistic stuff, I realized I enjoy the Q&A parts. I enjoy talking about my own experience. And I like wearing that educator hat also.
Ah, so the educator hat sort of came out of the performance hat.
Absolutely.
Got it.
And from there...
Was that a big revelation for you at the time?
I don't think it was an epiphany. I think it was a slowly developing. And from there, talking with other artists who do the Fringe circuit and talking about colleges and universities as a source of more steady income and more lucrative gigs.
Yeah.
And what I'm offering is able to check a lot of boxes that colleges and universities like around diversity, around education, and around performance. And so I can get students excited and they can get budgets to bring me in a way that, knock on wood, I am finding financially sustainable.
Awesome.
More or less.
That's very good. You too can do this out there. I guess my next question was So just putting the timeline together, so from 2008, when you first started doing some performance pieces, right? 2010 was your first realized Fringe
Absolutely.
production, and then you went to how many Fringes that year?
That year I just did Chicago Fringe.
Oh, you just did Chicago
Fringe was
Fringe.
the first Fringe I did.
Oh.
The year after...
We popped your Fringe
you
cherry.
You did pop my Fringe cherry. And I remember being in the performance space in Pilsen and the night before the Fringe opening crying to my director and to my amazing technicians at Fringe that this was too hard and too scary and I couldn't possibly do it. And it went great.
That surprises me because you are a consummate
No, I
professional.
was in tears.
You have amazing stage presence, and every time you get on stage, you command an audience.
Thank
so
you.
it's just funny to see you be a little vulnerable about that because I don't know, I just wouldn't have guessed it,
Yeah.
you know? So how much lead time did you have before that first, how much was that brand new material that you put together? I talk to the miscreants and these guys are always, flying by the seat of their pants, and I think they put their first Fringe show together in like 6 weeks or something crazy
I
like that.
I would like to think that in all things, I am more prepared than the League of Miscreants.
Well,
I'm gonna get in
now
trouble
I'm
for
asking
that.
you
I'm
about
gonna get in
the
trouble
very
for
first
that.
time.
I love you, League of Miscreants.
They would say that they're proud of that. What are you kidding?
I started working so that would have been Uncovering the Mirrors, and that I think had about a 6-month gestation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been relatively common for me. I've ambitiously produced, if not fully new material, a new piece just about every year since then. And I think that is something that I'm realizing I can't keep forever, both in terms of giving each piece the attention that it deserves and in terms of that type of material generation. But that piece, I think, was about a 6-month gestation.
And so where does that come from? Is this just a particularly prolific time in your life?
A lot
You're
of
gonna
it has
look back on it and
been-
be like, that was just that was a moment in time. Like,
I think that's part of it, that the last 7 or 8 years in particular has been the bulk of my transition experience, personally as a trans woman, and also leaving a full-time job, and also starting this new career. And so there have been a lot of things to write about and to perform about and to talk about. And I hope, in a good way, that the next 5 years of my life will maybe not be so tumultuous, which isn't to say I don't want excitement and isn't to say that I don't have new pieces that I'm thinking about. But I would like to find a little more stability.
yeah, that prompted a question, actually, that I was just thinking right now that I hadn't written down before, and it just sort of, when the material is so personal, and it's not like getting on and reading somebody else's lines and pretending to be a character, like, do you feel like you're living your own life, or are you living a life that, like, especially over the last few years, where you're like, well, this is gonna be, where you're like, just had sex with someone, and then you're like making notes to yourself on the smartphone, you're right,
There are
inside,
definitely
or you're like
moments
talking to your
of
doctor, and you're
that.
like, can you repeat that? I need that recorded right now.
There are moments of that where I've thought about, in the moment, how something is going to work as a potential piece. And I've heard that particularly from, there are stand-ups who talk about that.
Oh,
in
God,
interviews.
all the time.
And I think that's something that maybe deserves more thought on my end and that I haven't dwelled enough on, of wanting to be present and not in a moment without then examining that moment from the outside. Because there have definitely been situations when I've gone through a security checkpoint at the TSA and had an interaction, or when I've had a medical interaction, or when I've had a sexual realization, or when I've had a physical experience or a body experience, that I've had the moment of, all right, how is this story going to make sense on stage? And I've never had, and I hope I never had, the removal of how can I shape this moment to work on stage. That, I think, would be crossing a line into unhealthy.
Yeah.
But I have had that sort of eyes outside of myself.
If I make it personal for a minute, has anyone accused you of that ever?
Not that I can think of. I have definitely had moments where, particularly with some romantic relationships and with family, where I've given people heads up of either this is how I want to talk about something, is that okay? Or in 1 or 2 situations, I said, this is how I need to talk about it, and I want to make sure you know that ahead of time. And none of that has gotten a negative pushback. But I have had, like, I was dating someone who said, I don't want to be in any of your pieces. And I was upfront that where I am emotionally enters my pieces. And if you don't want to be talked about on stage, I won't talk about you on stage. But I can't pretend that I am not having experiences in my life.
It's a thin line, sounds like.
Absolutely. And it's something I want to be careful and caring and ethical about.
So you've performed at the Fringe Festival, and you've been to how many Fringes now?
I have been to 5 different
Name them all,
festivals.
because, like,
Yeah, I've been to the
people need to know
Chicago
where they
Fringe
are.
Festival, Kansas City Fringe, Indianapolis Fringe, Cincinnati Fringe, and Minnesota Fringe in Minneapolis.
So you're like, you've done all the Midwestern stuff.
I've done the
essentially.
Midwestern. These are basically the fringes I can drive to.
That's a good
Yeah.
That's a good tactic, actually.
If you're there for a week and a half, it's really nice to have a car.
So true. Didn't think about that, especially in cities that don't have good
Right.
public transit systems. So looking back, I mean, obviously the content has changed of your show each time that you've performed it. Like, what else has changed for you? Like, what's different about that first time besides the confidence piece? Like, what's different about the first show that you did at Chicago Fringe? Again, besides content.
I think I'm more comfortable exploring humor and taking myself less seriously, which isn't to say that I don't believe the words that I wrote in 2009 or 10 or 11 or whatever, but that, again, I'm in a less tumultuous place in my own life, hopefully, maybe slowly. And so can also acknowledge that as much as these things, being trans, can be hard and miserable and angsty, it can also be fun and funny. So I think that's something. And then I think I have gotten more comfortable as a storyteller in general. And so am less stressed about the experience of going up, because at the end of the day, it is my words. And so that makes it a little less scary. I was talking with a friend, and she was saying, if you forget the lines of Shakespeare, you can't really improv it. But if I forget the exact language I wrote, and I go up on stage with a specific script that is important to me, but if I forget the specific script, I can still have the general idea. And that has helped relieve some of that tension and panic.
I want to play a piece from one of your shows. Perhaps you can help us introduce it. It's the "I'm Scared."
So this
piece.
actually
Tell us about that.
isn't a piece from one of my shows yet. This was a piece that I wrote in late 2013 as I was starting to go into surgery. And so I had surgery on December 10th, 2013. And this was a piece I wrote leading up to that to process and to experience the fact that it was scary, that a lot of the time what you see, particularly around surgery experiences of trans women in movies or on talk shows or that sort of thing, it's only beautiful and it's only good and it's only exciting. And it was also beautiful and good and exciting, but it was also scary. And so that this was to honor that and to share that and to hold that up for other people and for myself.
Cool. Rebecca Kling and "I'm Scared." We'll call this piece "I'm Scared."
I'm scared. I currently have thousands of dollars sitting in a bank account, almost all of it given to me by friends, family, and strangers, for a surgery I don't really want. Before you freak out, I don't mean that I'm unsure, or uncertain, or don't want to do this, or blah, blah, blah. I mean I don't want to have surgery. It's like learning languages. I don't want to learn a new language. I want to have learned a new language. Similarly, I don't want to have this surgery. I want to have had this surgery. I am in no way uncertain that I'm doing the right thing, any more than I can be certain about anything, and I'm more certain about this than I am about most things. But it's still big and expensive and painful and gross. And I have all this support, which is scary in and of itself. It feels like a responsibility or a weight or a burden. $22,000, $17,500 for the surgery, the rest an estimate of travel and housing. Months of healing, daily dilation, drugs, pain, fingers crossed that everything will work, that I'll be able to come again. So yeah, scary. The unknowns are scary. Will there be any complications? How long will it take for me to recover sensation? Will I be able to orgasm again? How will I fare mentally and emotionally? But the knowns are pretty fucking scary too. I know that it's going to be painful. Really painful. Difficult to walk and bathe and get out of bed type painful. I know dilation is going to suck. The recommended schedule is 5 times a day, then 3 times a day, then once a day, then twice a week. Let's do some math. Dilating takes about half an hour. That's 140 hours in the first 2 months, another 160 for months 3 to 5, another 100 for the rest of the year, 400 hours of dilation. Painful, at least at first. Messy, always. There's lots of lube. Dilation. Sure, it will hopefully be fun as I rediscover nerve connections and sensation, but also scary. And for the first few weeks, possibly months, my new vagina is going to be gross and swollen and bloody and have bits falling off. My new vagina will have bits of dead flesh falling off as I heal, and this is considered normal. This is what I'm going to do to my body. This is what I want to do, to have done, past tense. I'm scared that I will experience that and vomit and cry and hate what I've done to myself. I'm scared about going off hormones before surgery and staying off them for a while afterwards. I'm scared my boobs will shrink. I'm scared my body, remembering that it can actually produce testosterone, will make me go crazy. I'm scared that I'm already expecting a certain amount of crazy leading up to the surgery. I'm scared I'll have hair growing in my new vagina. This is perhaps the least important and most ridiculous fear I have. I'm scared that this is going to make me feel less trans, care less about my community, my politics, my art, that I'll become complacent in my privilege and in my body. I'm scared.
That's powerful stuff.
Thank you. It's odd taking it and reading it now a little over, well, almost exactly 6 months tomorrow from when I had surgery, from a recording date, December 10th, and 6.5 or 7 months since I wrote that piece, of what fears made sense and what fears were, I think all of the fears made sense, but what fears were lived out and what fears maybe weren't. Also being on the other side of it, of a lot of the stuff that has been scary and hard now I'm through. And so I look back tenderly, but also a little, I want to be able to hold my hand from 6 months ago.
We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I also wanted to turn for a second because you mentioned, like, you were sort of talking about the transgender movement in a sense and how it's being portrayed in the media right now. If you had to sum it up, where is this movement at right now?
So the trans movement is at this juncture of becoming more conscious and unified with a lot of other political movements. And I think it is mirroring an experience that the women's rights movement and the civil rights movement and the gay rights movement has all gone through, of starting off or giving the most prominence to white, middle class, older trans people. And in the last decade or so, and particularly in the last couple of years, being pushed both from within and from without to give more prominence to youth and give more prominence to people of color and give more prominence to people who are economically less privileged. And so where I'm coming from as a trans activist, I want to be supporting that, of saying that as a white, economically advantaged, educationally advantaged trans woman, there is work I can do and there is work I need to be doing. I also need to use my voice to help lift up and acknowledge people who are less privileged. Mm-hmm. And I need to know when to shut up and let those people speak for themselves.
Sure.
And I think that's something that you saw certainly in the gay rights movement, which for much of its history has been primarily white, middle class, we're just like you, quote unquote, gay men.
Even women's movement, right?
Right.
Started with...
Well, it started with the suffragette movement, which was
economically
entirely about...
advantaged, right, white women.
Right.
Right.
And then moved to slightly younger and less economically advantaged. But now there's finally this acknowledgement of, oh, maybe your experience as a woman is different if you're a person of color. Maybe your experience as a gay person is different if you're poor. Maybe your experience as a trans person is different if you didn't have parental support for college.
So does that feel heavy to you? Like you're holding things up or waving the banner? Or
I think it's exciting.
Okay.
I think it's true in a way that leaving those populations out just doesn't accurately represent. That if you want to say we are a movement for trans people and not just a movement for white privileged trans people, you need to talk about those things. You need to talk about healthcare reform, and you need to talk about prison reform, and you need to talk about sex workers' rights and destigmatization, and you need to talk about housing rights, and you need to talk about not just, it's really easy to talk about the trans rights movement as employment non-discrimination and as healthcare access. Those are super, super important, but they are most important for people who are privileged in other ways, who have jobs and have homes and have stable sources of income and aren't worried about where they're going to sleep tonight. And to leave out the rest of that conversation, not to say employment non-discrimination and healthcare are unimportant, but to acknowledge that they can't be the only things that we talk about as a trans rights movement.
And what's standing in the way, besides ignorance, right? Like, what is standing in the way of people getting it?
I think
when you're out there, you're sort of like in the trenches, right? You're talking to kids every day who have maybe a limited worldview on trans people, maybe limited interaction.
Part of it is ignorance, and I use that word neutrally. Ignorance as in lack of knowledge. That the way we as a culture and popular culture and popular media in particular have talked about trans identity is very narrow, and it's very sexualized, and it's very fetishized and objectified. And so up until very recently, you could not, for example, buy a young adult novel with a trans main character. They just didn't exist. That's changed. And so there aren't a ton of them. I would certainly say there aren't enough of them. But you can now say, both to kids who are trans and kids who aren't, here is this book that presents this experience just as normal as any other experience. You couldn't turn on TV and find trans main characters portrayed in really positive lights. And in particular, up until Orange is the New Black, you certainly couldn't find a trans woman playing a trans character.
I was totally going to bring that up because I just started watching it. So
and it's great.
You can't give me any spoilers either, though. I've only seen like 3 episodes.
You know she ends up in prison, right?
God damn it! Yeah, I got that part. It's sort of in the name.
And it's exciting that we're at a moment where 2 of the biggest names around the trans movement right now are Laverne Cox, who plays Sophia in Orange is the New Black, and Janet Mock, who just had a new book, Redefining Realness, released, both of whom are trans women of color.
Like literally 2 days ago, I just saw this episode, so I'm not even familiar with the actress's name and didn't look it up. So tell me about her. And
well, it's exciting that there is, after Trans America and Boys Don't Cry and Ugly Betty and all of these and Dallas Buyers Club, all of these depictions of trans people that are made primarily by people who aren't trans for people who aren't trans. That there is a strong, wonderful actress, Laverne, who plays a really good character and then in interviews and conversations talks about it beautifully and is able to take, I was chatting with her around the Trans 100, which was an event in Chicago celebrating excellence in the trans community. And she said that she loves going into these schools and gets a filled auditorium of kids who want to hear about Orange is the New Black. And then she gets to talk about racism and about institutional oppression.
I love it. It's like a head fake.
Yeah. and so to have her and to have Janet as these big names as trans women of color is friggin' awesome.
You know, until you spoke about it, I wasn't even sure if it was a trans actor or not. Like,
and
I wasn't sure if they had like dressed her up or I had no idea. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I literally just watched the episode that gave her backstory.
Yeah.
And so again, I'm only like 5 episodes in.
Well, and I think when talking about popular culture and trans people, it's important to talk about the context versus the work in isolation. And I think Dallas Buyers Club is an easy place for that. I have heard, and I still haven't seen it, that in isolation, it's really good, that it tells a good story and is very well acted and is very well performed. In context, though, Jared Leto has said problematic things about trans people. He's used the word tranny, which is really problematic. The director, when asked if there were any trans actresses considered, expressed shock that trans actresses exist. And so there are all of these ways in which, in context, that work I have a problem with, and I have a problem with it being portrayed by an actor who isn't trans. Even though, in isolation, it might be a very good work. Does that distinction make sense?
It does.
And it's also not to say that I think trans people should only be played by trans actors. But again, if a person who isn't trans is going to play a trans character, I want them to do their research and be able to talk intelligently about it and be able to be a strong ally to the community and not contribute to these really negative depictions.
Yeah, that may be more of a critique of Jared Leto than maybe of the movie.
Right, but that's what I mean.
What do you mean?
That things exist in context and in
right,
culture.
Of course. And we can't say like we can only limit it to, I mean, how many beautiful women have we seen playing ugly women, for example, in movies and stuff like that? It was like a whole movement. You remember when that was like the thing? Yeah. It was like Charlize Theron and Halle Berry were all...
Hollywood ugly.
Yeah, Hollywood ugly, right? I saw the movie. I thought it was very good. I didn't think the story was primarily about Jared Leto's character either.
It's not.
It was more about Matthew McConaughey's character. So I think until that movie is made, that's about that trans character's journey. Maybe the movie has already been made. I don't seek out trans-specific movies. I guess I seek out whatever's out there. Or I see whatever's being pushed to the major media. But I don't know. And I'm curious now about what he said and how he said it and all that other
stuff. He clearly spoke as someone who had not been particularly educated about the trans movement and the trans community. Now, the flip side of that... That's too bad,
because my assumption always is like when a movie happens, like someone gets like grilled really deeply, like they really get into their role.
The flip side of that is if you look at something like The Crying Game, which was sort of a classic example of a movie that doesn't paint trans people in horribly positive light, there wasn't any discussion around that. You weren't seeing articles in the mainstream press around whether or not trans people should be playing trans characters. And so I think it's really clear that the culture is moving. And that, I think, is exciting, the fact that we're able to have this conversation about Dallas Buyers Club and that sort of thing. And so I don't mean to sound... I hope I don't sound hopeless, but it's wanting to continue to push that forward.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you make most of your material for non-trans people in a sense then? Is it always sort of in the back of your mind like to proselytize in a sense, or how do you balance that with just sort of telling your own story?
I think it depends on the situation, and one of the things that I enjoy about the work that I'm able to do is that I can tweak things depending on the audience. So for fringe festivals and for theater festivals more broadly, I'm going to assume the audience doesn't have the same level of knowledge that if an LGBT group is bringing me in might have at a college.
Sure.
That said, when I'm going to a college, I'll talk with them about their campus environment, and some colleges are going to say, we don't have any out trans students. We want it to be pretty basic and get to the fundamentals. Some campuses are going to say, we have a really strong trans population, and we really want to get into the nitty-gritty of some of this subtle talk about politics and that sort of thing. And that's exciting because then I can tweak work. Similarly, if I'm performing at the Center in Halstead in Chicago, which is an LGBT community center, I may be able to push myself and the work that I'm doing in a slightly different way.
So what's fun about performing at Fringe? What's different than any other venues that you go to, or
I think
what do you feel like you can do there that you can't do elsewhere?
As a performer, the community, that the network of performers and the camaraderie is really beautiful. I feel like Fringe Festival is a perfect example of a rising tide being able to lift all boats, because all of the shows are happening more than once, and it's happening in this festival atmosphere. So it never feels like, oh, that show sold out. God damn it, they didn't come to my show. It feels like that show sold out. I'm going to go flyer and they can come to my show. And that's really exciting and is sort of an example of we can all win rather than us versus them or me versus someone else or theater companies battling. It's also fun as an artist to be able to go see shows that as a participant I get to see a lot. And that's a blast. And some of it is amazing, and some of it is less amazing.
I feel like in that permissive atmosphere, too, that you probably, this is just a guess, that you probably get people seeing your show that probably wouldn't have ever
Absolutely.
guessed that they'd be sitting in that audience before.
And that's the
or
last
who would
thing.
even like express, if I may go this far, like disgust or fear, right, around what you bring to the table.
That because it's a festival atmosphere, you sort of have this pressure cooker environment where people are willing to say, oh, it's totally affordable. At worst, it's only an hour. Yeah, I'm going to go check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Or she was really nice. She handed me a postcard outside of this other show. Or the name is whatever it is, whatever's drawing people in. So I think you can get a mix of audience in a way that is tougher outside of a fringe festival environment. And that is really lovely.
Yeah, that's absolutely awesome. Oh goodness, what else do I have? This time is just going so quickly. You're so well spoken.
You're so handsome. I don't know how to respond to compliments. That was really awkward.
What is?
Thank you. I think the correct response was thank you.
What about other women's issues that are like on the table? Do you? How does that come across to you? Like on on your Facebook feed or whatever? Do you feel alienated from that movement? Do you feel like you're right in the thick of it?
I think it like so many
Has
things.
that changed over time?
It depends. It's definitely changed over time because as I've become more comfortable with myself as a woman, I am more comfortable demanding a place at the table around women's issues. And that I think fundamentally many women's issues.
You said demanding as if like women aren't welcoming.
Well, I want to be very careful. Historically, women's rights has not either been welcoming or has just not been aware of trans rights as an issue. More recently, that's definitely changed. And so in my personal life, in my activist life, I'm surrounding myself by people and I'm intentionally engaging in communities that are totally conscious of and aware of trans rights. I don't want to say demanding as if there's this horrible pushback. But there are definitely factions within feminist circles or within women's rights circles that are not supportive and not positive around trans identity. And so wanting to be able to talk about that issues of, particularly around healthcare, fundamentally are that we, anyone, men, women, trans people, any person should be able to decide what their body means, how it works, and what can and should be done with it medically. With women's rights issues, that's stuff like reproductive health care and abortion access. And with trans people, that's things like transitioning access and healthcare support. And I think at the basis, at their core, those come out of the same thing, that my body is mine, it means what I say it means, and I should be able to do with it what I feel is appropriate. And that where there's solidarity, women's rights has really enthusiastically and excitedly embraced that. Where there is sometimes division is where there's this frustrating aspect of our body is not our destiny, except if you're trans, in which case it sort of kind of is. Because you have the same women who would be horrified if I said, well, you have a vagina, that means you have to be a mother and a housewife. And then they turn around and say, well, you have a penis, and so that means you have to be XYZ.
I don't want to run out of time before we talk about this, too. It's like you finally had what you comedically call the surgery. Yes. I'm doing air quotes around my head right now in December. And the reason you make that distinction is because there's a lot of surgeries that one may go through, right, before fully transitioning. But you finally, how's it been? I know I don't want to reduce you to just sexual things or your sexual parts, but this is big news.
It's interesting. People want to know about it.
People want to know about
it. And I asked people to help me fund it. And I wrote about
Which
it
I think we did.
on my blog.
I think I did.
Yeah.
I did, or Chicago Fringe did.
You absolutely were. You were amazing supporters. And that's part of the reason I love being part of this community. And so I would simultaneously say that, yes, one should not assume that every trans person is interested in talking about this or willing to talk about this. I personally am. So, yes.
Okay.
It's been kind of crazy in how quickly it's become normal in a way that I think is sort of the ultimate validation.
What was it like, before we get into like the sort of wider view, what was it like just waking up? Is that weird? You're waking up, you're in bandages.
Drugs.
Yeah.
My mom says she was in the room that they were bringing me up to, and the nurse had said, she's going to be out of it. She's going to be groggy. She may not be very talkative. And my mom apparently hears me chatting with the orderly from down the hall who's pushing me on the cart. And I'm just talking away, blabbing away. Apparently he rolled me in. I don't remember this. Apparently he rolled me in and I turned to my mom and said, look at this thing I did. Look at this thing I did. Look at this thing that I did. I called some friends that I have no
So
memory
Rebecca
of.
Kling, drug her up and get her talking.
Yep.
That's how it works.
So the first day I was in the hospital, the surgery was on a Tuesday. I was there till Friday. The first day I remember very little of. I was still on the anesthesia. And by all accounts from talking to my mother, I was very, very, very happy. Then I started to come out of the anesthesia and was not happy. I was on morphine, which is great. But there was a lot of discomfort. I was in these compression leggings to help with blood flow and circulation. I had apparently, and I didn't know this at the time, lost some blood during surgery. And so ultimately they had to give me a transfusion.
Of your own blood?
No, of donor blood.
Oh, okay.
And so all of that was icky and unpleasant. The hospital staff was great. I was cared for well, but it was uncomfortable. And I remember at one point where they had tried to get me on solid food, and I had ordered something that sounded in my mind appetizing, and they brought it up and was disgusting hospital food, and I just started crying because it was just sort of the straw that broke of, this is hard and it's scary, and I don't remember what it was, but I just want food that sounds good.
Yeah.
And I hadn't been able to eat solid food for 48 hours before the surgery, so I hadn't eaten in like a week at that point. It was a lot. When I was discharged, I went to a B&B that the surgeon has a relationship with, and again, it was just a lot. I was on Vicodin at that point, watching endless amounts of Friends on my laptop. Just endless amounts of Friends. And was constipated and was having trouble eating. It was not fun.
Well, I asked for it. I'm getting it.
Yeah.
That's good.
And it was nothing that was unexpected. All of these were things that the doctor said happen. It was nothing that was dangerous at any point, but it was not fun.
Okay. So you're back. You go back to Chicago. How long were you at the B&B?
I was at the B&B about another week, so I was in
Another week or
Philadelphia
so.
almost 2 weeks.
Got it.
And then I went back and stayed at my mom's for another week. She's up in Skokie and is
Yeah.
awesome. And
That's who you go to when you need healing.
Yeah. And chicken soup and and it was really lovely. My dad came out to visit while I was in Philly to see me, and I had friends coming up to my mom's in Skokie to see me. So I was certainly well taken care of, but it was not fun. And at that point, once I was at my mom's, I started to feel well enough to realize how lousy I was feeling, and well enough to not just want to sleep 20 hours a day, but not actually well enough to do anything. I played a lot of video games.
That's what you do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably beat some video games.
I did. Last of Us on PS3 is a brilliant game. It's one of the best
You're a
games I've ever
nerd.
played. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another part of your personality that like you don't necessarily know unless you know
Yes.
you. I love your slideshows in your shows or your graphs and
They're
things.
fun.
They're fun. People need to see your show. So how long until you were like back on your feet? Until you were feeling? I mean,
So I took
3 months
all
now?
of January off and almost all of February off. The first performance stuff I did was the very end of February. And then I started traveling I traveled to colleges and universities. I started traveling in March and April. And I would say now I'm maybe 90%. I'm not fully feeling like I'm healed. And I've been told it can take up to a year to really feel good. But I'm feeling pretty darn good. I went jogging for the first time this week.
and by the way, if you're listening in another state, it's been a miserable winter in Chicago. I'm sure
Oh my
you've
God,
heard.
it was glorious
So the
this
fact that anybody goes outside and does anything involving exercise, fitness, moving your legs off the ground in any pace that's more than a shuffle is both glorious, but also it kind of freaks you out. You're like, oh, right, those muscles in my legs that I haven't used all winter.
My legs were not happy, but it was good to feel like my body can do things other than lay in bed and watch Netflix, which has not been true for most of the last 6 months. So I'm
Right.
feeling better and better.
And are you feeling more at home than ever before in your body? How is that? Is it
Almost
what you
always.
expected? Is it not what you expected?
Yes, it is what I expected and not what I expected. The upkeep is still a little frustrating, that I'm dilating. So when you have a scar, your body wants to heal it and tighten it and make it as small as possible. And I have this new tissue that I would like to not be as small as possible, that I want to be able to maybe put things in someday. So I have to dilate every day, which helps keep the scar tissue from healing too tight. And just healing, and the scar is still healing. So for all that I'm glad that I did this, I certainly have to think about my genitalia more than I did before. Peeing sitting down is a bitch. It's messy.
I think we heard that on the intro, or we will hear that later.
Yeah.
One of those two.
It's sort of,
We throw these podcasts together, people. Deal with it.
but it's been good.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. So no sexual experience yet.
Not with anyone else.
Got it. Just solo.
I can successfully say that everything works. Yay!
We're throwing our fists in the air,
Yay! I'll throw
including
my
the
fist in
intern on the
air
other
as
side
well.
of the class.
And that's definitely been fun and a little overwhelming to have that new exploration. That, again, even if I didn't love it, I knew how my body worked really well. And I'd had, a decade and a half of masturbatory practice. Vinny is slow clapping. And so
I just think that the phrase masturbatory practice
that's
should
gonna be
always
the
get
title of my next Fringe show.
that should be the title of your next Fringe show. Should always get an ovation. Anyway.
And so that has been fun, but also scary and overwhelming. And I'm both looking forward to and a little scared of some sort of partner fun, because it's new and it's emotionally tender and vulnerable.
How old are you, if I may ask?
29.
29, and you're getting to discover all these things.
I have re-virginified myself.
That's awesome. I feel like you could write a bit on that.
Yeah.
That would take 15 minutes to 20 minutes to explore every little angle, nook and cranny of that, if you will,
Are you
pun
saying
intended.
you want to explore my nooks and crannies?
Dude, I'm ready. The moment you're ready to drop trow in this, you probably make me do it too, is the problem. You'd probably be...
I do like reciprocity.
You've done that at your show. You had someone eat
a chocolate penis.
a chocolate penis.
Yeah,
Explain
my
that.
chocolate penis.
Explain that very briefly. Explain that.
I when doing this fundraiser for my surgery, I was trying to think of fun rewards, and I thought, well, obviously a replica of my own genitalia. And so I was able to get that made.
With lasers?
With lasers. I went to New York, and they did a laser scan of my genitalia and printed out a 3D model of it. And I've made candles, and I've made plaster of Paris molds to decorate, and I made chocolate penises. And so for my show last year, every performance I invited someone to come up on stage and eat my chocolate cock.
Eat your chocolate cock from your area. You held it there.
I held it. Well, I gave people the option. I like
That's
consent.
true. But you did give them a little bit of peer pressure, though,
I did
too. You
give
were
some
like,
peer pressure.
I've never left an audience without someone volunteering to come up and eat this sexy. And they did.
They
did
did.
it. They do it every time. You get them. They like that. What else was I going to ask you? So what's next? I mean, we're probably running out of time here, and I feel like I could talk to you for a million years
like you
with all the
too.
questions. Not like that. I'm just saying that I got a lot of questions for you. But again, we are naked. We're naked. We're naked in here right now. You'll never know whether I'm telling the truth or not. Eric's showing his chest. That's sexy.
I didn't know you had a third nipple.
Whatever.
That wasn't a negative comment.
Whatever. Like what can people expect from your next Fringe show?
So my next Fringe show is Something New Vagina.
Right. You're still sticking with that title.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm taking myself very seriously. And it's going to be a lot about what we're talking about this figuring out of how this works and what this means, both physically and emotionally and metaphorically.
Sweet. So people come and see it. Chicago Fringe runs August 28th. I should know when my own festival's happening. August 28th to September 7th. of 2014 in the Jefferson Park neighborhood. Again, I encourage you to go check out chicagofringe.org. We got so many amazing artists on the docket once again. And Rebecca, we thank you once again for being a loyal fringer.
Thank you for putting up with me again.
You always bring a wonderful, professional, awesome, compelling show to Chicago Fringe.
I appreciate it.
We love that about you. Tell us a little bit about this piece that we're going to see on the way out. It's the I'm excited piece.
So I wrote the I'm scared piece and wanted to counterpoint that expressing that fear was very important to me and was something that I was hesitant to do. But I was also super excited about a lot of things. And so this was trying to remember that and remind myself of that.
Rebecca Kling, Chicago Fringe Festival. We want to thank, before we leave, of course, the Chicago Fringe intern extraordinaire, our man on the audio making everything happen, Woo! Eric Somogyi. We want to thank Columbia College and the Advanced Sound Suite and all the folks who make it happen behind the scenes. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks so much. Thanks again, Rebecca.
Thank you, Vinnie.
We'll see you all next time.
I'm excited about having a body that will fit. A body I can bathe in the shower without having extra dangly bits. A body that will be hugged by form-fitting clothing without unseemly bulging. I'm excited about shopping for that clothing, trying on dresses and skirts and pants and, of course, yoga pants, and feeling like they were designed for my body and vice versa. I'm excited about exploring my new body. I'm dreading dilation, yes, but I'm also excited by it, about having this new part constructed from the old that offers new opportunities for pleasure and simply for comfort. I'm excited about getting to know my new anatomy, its rounded parts and squishy bits, and how it fits with the rest of me. I'm excited about sex and being sexual. I'm confident my brain and nerves and body will figure out how this new part works. I'm eagerly dreading the shocks and pinches and jolts that are supposed to come as the brain connects the dots, so to speak, and recovers from the trauma of surgery. I'm excited about vibrators and dildos and penises and fingers and tongues and eyes. I'm excited about being looked at, about having lovers gaze adoringly at my new flesh before pouncing on it and devouring me whole. I'm excited about going out, going swimming, going to the beach in a suit that doesn't have awkward shorts covering my bottom half. About lazing out in the sun and tanning, of having a tan line of swimsuits instead of gym shorts. I'm excited about inevitably skinny dipping, of showing off my new body, of being obnoxiously pleased with myself. I'm excited about exploring my new body through writing and performance. Of the first time I'm naked on stage with my new body, you all knew it was coming, don't act surprised. Of drawing on the experience of surgery to be a better activist, a better educator, a better artist, I'm excited to be able to offer my new experiences to others as a resource, the same way friends and community members have done with me. I'm excited to worry less about my body, not worry, I'm not that naive, but to have one worry reduced. I'm excited to reduce my risk of being outed without my consent. Again, the risk will never be zero, and I don't plan to suddenly go stealth, but I expect conversations about my transness, particularly with sexual partners or around my body, to be less fraught. And getting patted down at the airport will certainly be less worrying. I'm excited about all of that and more. I'm excited about healing, biking, swimming, sex, clothing, politics, art. I'm excited.